first conditional use hearing?
They are.
Okay. Are you aware that the applicant has now modified the mix of the proposed units and types under this current application?
That's correct, I am.
And are you generally aware of what those modifications were or are?
Yes, the number of units is the same as Plan A from the previous application, 317 units. The number of four-bedroom single-family detached dwellings has gone from 200 down to 118. There's a new dwelling type called single-family detached front entry, also with four bedrooms. There are 64 of those. And the number of three-bedroom carriage homes has changed from 117 to 135.
Okay, and have you updated your fiscal impact analysis accordingly?
I have. There are other changes as well, but the changes to the development scenario are the most important ones.
What other changes did you analyze in order to update the study?
I incorporated the current township budget, the current school year budget, as up-to-date demographics as I could get, up-to-date tax rates, up-to-date mortgage rates, up-to-date PennDOT liquid fuels subsidies per person and per mile, and other such what we call input figures.
Okay. And I put on the podium there what I've marked as Exhibit A41, entitled Fiscal Impact Analysis, dated August 9, 2019. Did you prepare or supervise the preparation of that fiscal impact analysis?
I prepared it, yes.
And what was the scope of that fiscal impact analysis?
It's the same as the previous one, to study the demographic and fiscal impacts of the proposed development in its current iteration.
Okay, and what methodologies did you analyze or use in your analysis?
Well, in general, I use what's called the per capita multiplier method, which simply is to determine the average expenditure for both the township and the school district and apply that average expenditure to the prospective township residents and school district public school students.
Okay, and how did you determine, excuse me, some of the data in there, such as assessed values for proposed units, and how did you consider demographic profiles?
Well, the assessed data is simply the projected sales price of the homes multiplied by the current common level ratio for Chester County put out by the State Tax Equalization Board in Harrisburg. That's 49.3%. The assessed value of the proposed development at build-out is projected to total nearly $122 million.
Okay.
In terms of demographics, I use a study very commonly used. This is by Rutgers University Center for Urban Policy Research. This is the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. This is specific to Pennsylvania. It is dated June 2006, and it studied new housing built in the Commonwealth between 1990 and the year 2000. This study differentiates demographics by four factors: dwelling type, so singles as opposed to townhouses, as opposed to apartments and so forth; dwelling size, 4 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms and so on; dwelling value, higher end units tend to have lower demographics than lower end units; and tenure, that would be units that are for sale versus units that are rentals, especially with respect to multifamily developments.
And Mr. Babbitt, you stated that that study was dated 2006. Is it still applicable to the current?
Yes. Unfortunately, Rutgers hasn't done a newer study, which is a pity. I also have another study which is specific to Montgomery County, called Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, Characteristics of the Population in New and Existing Housing Units. This is from 2012, done by my old office, the Montgomery County Planning Commission. And even though it is applicable to Montgomery County, I would argue that demographics in new houses aren't going to be appreciably different in Montgomery County or Chester County. The figures in that study generally corroborate the ones in the Rutgers study.
Okay, let's talk about some additional data points you analyzed. How would you anticipate the total residential population for the proposed development?
Well, if we take the demographic multipliers for each of the 3 dwelling types, the 2 single family detached dwellings are essentially the same when it comes to demographics. We are looking at a total of 317 units and a total of 937 persons. That would assume full build-out and full occupancy.
And then you took all of your information, am I wrong, and then analyzed the total township expenditures, school district expenditures, and then the impacts on those revenues, is that correct?
Yes, well, it's both sides of the ledger sheet, as it were, looking at both expenditures for the township and the school district, as well as revenue for the township and the school district.
Okay, and looking at Exhibit A41, do you have tables that summarize those numerical values in terms of the impacts?
Well, the full table's at the very end of the document.
And why don't you walk us through, I guess, the township is the first one. It's
Yes.
entitled Analysis of the Fiscal Impact to Westtown Township, and it's the second to last sheet on Exhibit A41, correct?
That is correct.
So if you can take us through that analysis, please.
In general, there are 3 panels in the spreadsheet, and then there are notes at the bottom. The first panel shows, for each of the 3 dwelling types, the number of units. Column C has the average market value per unit. That's the average out sale, assuming an average level of added features and an average lot premium. Multiply the number of units times the average market value and then times the common level ratio down in the notes section, and you get the total assessed value in column D. The persons per unit, that would be the demographic multipliers from the Rutgers study, would be column E. Column F gives you the number of persons overall, totaling 937, again, at build-out and full occupancy. Column G is the township expenditures, which are determined by multiplying the number of persons by the number at the very bottom, cell D32, that would be the 2019 township per capita operating expenditure of just over $500. That is a function of taking the township operating expenditures of about $9.8 million, subtracting some pass-through and excluded expenditures and some inter-fund transfers of about $2.2 million. So the net would be 7.6 or 7.7 million. The proportion of township expenditures attributable to existing non-residential development is calculated at 28.8% through a series of calculations based on the assessed value of non-residential properties vis-a-vis the assessed value of all properties in the township using information from the Board of Assessment. So whatever is left, the $7,651,000 minus the $2.2 million would be attributable to existing residential population, and you divide by the township's population estimated in 2019 at 10,899. That would be cell I-27 to get the $500 and change per person. Apply that to the 937 persons. We're looking at annual township expenditures of approximately $468 million. Excuse me, $468,000. I apologize. And on a per unit basis, that ranges from 1,100 per unit up to 1,750 per unit for the 4-bedroom single-family detached dwellings. The middle panel is all revenue sources. The first would be the real estate tax. Very simply, that's the assessed value multiplied by the township real estate tax millage. Down in the lower right corner, 3.5 mils. That gives us $425,000, which nearly, in and of itself, one revenue source, nearly covers all of the township expenditures. Earned income tax, the next column, is determined based on the value of housing and the Fannie Mae criteria that no more than 28% of the household's income be used towards housing costs, which include a mortgage at the current mortgage rate. It includes insurance, it includes property taxes, and if there's a homeowners association fee, which I believe there is. That determines the minimum household income necessary to afford that particular house in that particular township at that particular moment. And if you like, I can look up the actual minimum annual household income figures, if you like.
Not at this time, unless the board will have that question or another party.
But then we take those household figures and multiply them by the number of units and by the township's tax rate of 0.5%, we come up with $304,000 a year in earned income tax. That's essentially the minimum level of earned income tax that would accrue based on the income levels it would take to afford these houses. Real estate transfer tax is the number of units times their market value times a turnover rate, which is 5% for single homes, 10% for the carriage homes. Those numbers are in the bottom right corner, and multiplied by the township's 0.5% real estate transfer tax rate. The township charges a refuse collection fee, which is applied to all the units. That source yields $101,000 per year. There's some franchise fee and miscellaneous revenue, largely from cable TV, franchise fees, and some other revenue. Finally, we have state highway aid revenue, liquid fuels, as I mentioned before. That's $33,000, so the total revenue is about $972,000. And that ranges per unit between the carriage homes of about $2,726 up to the larger single-family detached units at $3,436 per unit per year. The bottom panel would be the net. For the township, take the revenue, subtract the expenditures. We have a total net revenue of $503,204 per year as a projection. Per unit basis, that ranges from $1,347 for the single-family detached units with the front entry garage, up to $1,686 per unit for the larger single-family detached. Overall, I would call your attention to cell D24. The projection is that annual township revenue will exceed annual township expenditures by more than 100%. So we're looking at essentially double the amount of revenue compared to the expenditures for the township every year. Okay. In addition, I will add one more thing before we turn the page. The real estate transfer tax is the ongoing annual real estate transfer tax revenue from the kind of ongoing sales of the homes. In addition to that, we have what I would call the initial real estate transfer tax revenue from the initial sales of the homes. That would be from the company that builds the homes to whoever would be the first buyers of those homes. That is not an ongoing activity. That's a one-time activity at the very beginning of the development, and then after that, those homes would be subject to the real estate transfer tax on an ongoing basis. But the point is that the initial real estate transfer tax revenue is projected to be $1,232,575 over the build-out period. And that same figure also will accrue to the school district. That's $1.2 million to each of the township and the school district.
And speaking of the school district, if we turn the page to the last page of Exhibit A41, you have a similar table as well. And if you could walk us through, I believe the expenditures are different, but the revenue categories are fairly similar. Is that correct?
Yes, so let's start at the top panel. Column E has the number of school-age children per unit from the Rutgers study, 0.21 for the carriage homes and 1.02 for the single-family detached with 4 bedrooms. The school-age children would total 214, but of course not all of those will attend public schools. So that number is multiplied by 86.2% down in the notes section, which is the percentage of township school-age children specific to Westtown Township in public schools from the Census Bureau 2017. So out of the 214 school-age children, only 185 are projected to attend the public school system. The annual school district expenditures are again determined in the per capita multiplier method, multiplying that 185 students by the annual net expenditure per student at the very bottom. For the school district, that's $20,135, determined by starting with the school district's total expenditures of just shy of $262 million, subtracting some pass-through expenditures. The net expenditures would be about $254 million, dividing by the student enrollment. This would be the total enrollment, all of the students for which the school district is responsible financially, regardless of whether they are actually housed in school district facilities or elsewhere, which gives us the $20,135 per student. So the annual school district expenditures at build-out and full occupancy are projected to total about $3.7 million. That ranges on a per unit basis between a low of about $36.47 for the carriage homes up to $17,712 per unit per year for the detached dwellings. The middle panel, again, is the revenue. The real estate tax is the number of units times the total assessment multiplied times the school district's real estate tax millage in the bottom right corner, 21.6622 mils, that's for the current year. And then I also subtract the homestead exclusion for every one of these homes. I'm assuming that everyone signs up for the homestead exclusion. That's $6,665 per unit per year. That means that these homeowners will not pay tax on the first $6,665 worth of assessed value every year for the school district. So that source yields approximately $2,587,000 per year. Earned income tax is determined in exactly the same way as the township, the same number, $304,000. Real estate transfer tax, also done the same way, yields about $83,000. State and federal revenue is simply the revenue from those two entities divided by the 12,618 figure multiplied by the number of new students. So that's $3,705 times 185 public school students. That yields about $684,000 per year in state and federal revenue. Finally, there's some interest earnings of about $14,000. So the total annual revenue is $3,672,524, and the per unit revenue ranges between about $86.42 for the carriage homes up to $14,216 for the single-family homes. Again, take the revenue, subtract expenditures, and for the school district, we project a very modest annual deficit of about $43,000 a year, essentially the cost to educate 2 public school students. The expenditures exceed revenue by 1.2%, which is virtually without meaning in an organization with a $261 million budget. But again, there is a projection for a very modest annual deficit for the school district. Similar to the township impact, the school district will also receive $1,232,575 in initial real estate transfer tax revenue from the sales of the units from the builder to whoever buys them the very first time. That would be a capital revenue source that I've always suggested to municipalities and school districts that they use for capital purposes.
And that's not included in your total analysis in the charts, is that correct?
Well, it's on the chart, but it's not included in the annual revenue. That's correct, because it's a one-time revenue.
Okay. All right, I have nothing further for Mr. Babbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Edelman. Why don't we turn to our parties? We'll go through those first, and then we'll come back to the board and see if they have any questions. We'll go down through our list. Mr. Gill, any questions on behalf of the Planning Commission? I think you need to get a little closer to that microphone so the public can hear you, if you don't mind. No, maybe turn up the volume a little.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Mr. Babbitt, my name is Michael Gill. I have the privilege of representing the Westtown Planning Commission in this matter. And just a couple of questions to try to clarify your testimony or understand it a little bit better. How do the numbers that you're reporting in Exhibit A41... Sorry. Is that better? Okay. How do the numbers that you're reporting in Exhibit A41 with regard to township and school district impacts compare to the numbers that you reported in your earlier analysis from Crebilly 1?
In general, the bottom line has gotten better for the township. No, I apologize. I'm sorry. It was slightly better for the first time around by $9,000. It's almost exactly the same. It has gotten appreciably better for the school district. Previously, in 2016, the projection was for an annual net deficit of about $129,000. That annual net deficit has now decreased in size to about $43,000.
And do you attribute that increase in, do you attribute that lessening of the deficit to the school district to the change in unit mix?
The change in what?
In unit mix.
In part, yes, and also the projected values of the units.
Okay, the projected values of the units have increased since Crebilly 1?
For some of the units, yes, that's correct.
Okay. How do you determine the market value of each unit type?
I don't. I simply ask the applicant to provide that. The applicant does all kinds of pro formas on every project. Every applicant does this, obviously. And so they have a pretty good feel for the average outsale price of these dwelling units.
Did the applicant provide you with any data to support the numbers that it was reporting to you, or did it just give you numbers based on its own internal analyses?
I would say the latter. I tend not to disagree with applicants who provide these figures to me unless I see something that I find to be completely out of the realm of possibility. I did not find anything like that in this instance.
Okay. So in making a determination, for instance, that a single-family front garage home will have a market value of $910,000, you accepted that, again, at face value, having come from the applicant.
Well, you are not correct, sir. The front entry garages are projected to be sold for an average price of $805,000.
I'm sorry, I read that wrong.
Side entry garages are $910,000, right?
So I'll ask my question again with reference to the correct housing type. You simply accepted the applicant's information to you that a market value of a side entry garage, 4-bedroom single-family dwelling would be $910,000.
That's correct.
And in what year is that estimated to be?
I don't know.
Okay. Would that be the same answer with regard to the other two housing types?
Yes.
Okay.
In general, a fiscal impact analysis is a snapshot in time.
Okay.
You're taking a look at the current level of taxation and expenditures and so forth, so we'd be looking at current values. What might happen 5 years into the future, obviously, things will change on both sides of the ledger, which will probably largely offset to a large degree.
Okay, so the moment in time that this snapshot is taken is when? Present?
Well, August 9th of 2019. I'm sure since then the township has adopted a new budget, which is not included in this study because it was submitted late last year.
Okay.
We are still under the same school district budget, however.
Yes. Can you explain for us all why a home with 3 bedrooms is only estimated to have less than a quarter of one school-age child?
Because that is the empirical data as determined by the folks at Rutgers with their supercomputers based on census data in the 2000 census. This is actual numbers from actual houses that were built in the 1990s.
Okay, in the 1990s?
Yes.
Okay. Have you done any independent analyses of those data to determine whether or not they remain valid 30 years on?
Well, it's 20 years since the 2000 census. The Rutgers study looked at the 2000 census figures. So
I'm
it's
sorry,
only 20 years on from that.
So those data from the 2000 census were looking backwards at houses that had been built in the 1990s.
Right, essentially new homes. That's all they wanted to look at. They wanted to isolate new houses built during the 1990s and studied in the 2000 census. They didn't really want to look at houses that were built in the 1930s or the 1970s or whatever.
Okay. So then, with regard to my question, have you done any independent analyses to determine whether or not those data remain valid 20 years on?
And the answer is, I looked at this Montgomery County study, which is almost exactly the same methodology, looking at houses built in Montgomery County between 2000 and 2010, studied in the 2010 census. And this study determined that single-family attached units, new housing, here we are, had children per unit. The difference between the studies is nuanced. The county study did not differentiate by dwelling size or dwelling value, just by dwelling type. But in general, the two sets of numbers, I would argue, corroborate each other. One is a smaller subset of the other, however, but they're looking at generally the same results. By and large, most school-age children in suburban environments live in single-family detached dwellings, especially in terms of new units. Far fewer school-age children live in new townhomes and new apartments.
And yet, and forgive my ignorance, the homes are still built with 3 bedrooms, correct?
I should assume so, yes.
In performing a fiscal impact analysis, you're looking at the net impact on the municipal and school district fisc, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so in looking at the net impact, is it important to understand the economic impact of a property in its pre-developed state?
When you say economic impact, do you mean fiscal impact?
Yes, I do.
Not really, no. That is not something that is typically studied in fiscal impact analyses unless it is specifically requested by either a municipality or an applicant. I study the existing fiscal impacts perhaps 5 or 10% of the time.
Okay, so you didn't consider the costs to the township or to the school district, such as it might be, of the Crebilly property in its current condition as opposed to the future condition?
That's correct. That was not in my charge.
Okay. When considering the economic impact of development, do you consider external?
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Okay, I'll ask you. Why? The microphone. There's no expectation of confidentiality when the microphone is on.
There's no presumption of confidentiality. The reason is because that the purpose of the study is to determine what the future fiscal impacts will be, not what the current impact is. What the current impact is really doesn't have much of an impact. It's not that it's zero or a positive or a negative number. It's that nobody really cares what the existing impact is in terms of the school district and the township expenditures and revenue. What we care about, what the township and the school district care about, is what will be the impacts once the development is built.
Okay, so your answer to my earlier question about whether or not you're looking at net impacts before development, post-development, you answered that question yes, but that's not technically correct, right?
I'm not sure I heard you, and if so, I'm not sure I understood you.
Okay. When considering the fiscal impact of a development, do you consider external factors such as the impact of the loss of open space upon a community?
No, that is a virtually impossible subject to assign a dollar value to. It is not something that can easily be determined to have its fiscal impact studied or put into a dollar value with any reasonable expectation of accuracy or ease for that matter.
Okay. Do you consider the, corollary question, do you consider the economic impact of the loss of open space upon the values of properties proximate to that open space?
The answer is no, but again, I would caution you, this is a fiscal impact analysis, not an economic impact analysis. Those are actually two different animals.
Understood.
This is, strictly speaking, the fiscal impact, which means the impact to the municipality and the school district. But no, I would not study that because I do not think that the development of one site will cause a significant impact, particularly in the assessed value of every single property in a region.
Have you ever in your career considered or studied in any manner or form the economic impact of the loss of open space upon a community? Not necessarily for this project, but generally in your career.
No, an economic impact analysis is, again, a different study altogether, and it requires someone with a different set of skills the ones I have.
Okay.
If I'm asked to do an economic impact analysis, I forward it on to colleagues of mine who do that sort of thing all the time.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a series of questions similar to the ones I just did with regard to traffic impacts. Have you ever in the course of your career considered the impacts, fiscal or economic, upon a municipality as a result of an increase in traffic congestion?
No.
Will the roads in this development be dedicated to Westtown Township?
It's a very good question. Let me see if I can find that out. Yes, the projection is for 4.3 linear miles of public roadways in the proposed development.
Okay. You needed to look that up. Did you know that they would or would not be developed or dedicated to the township when you considered the impact of the development on the liquid fuels tax revenue for the township arising from the development?
I'm sorry, Michael, I'm having trouble hearing the questions.
Did you consider whether or not the roadways would be developed when you were calculating the impact of this development on the township's liquid fuels tax revenues?
Yes, that's the only, well, I'm sorry, that's the only revenue source that would be related to whether the roads are public or private. And there would also, in theory, also be an expenditure difference if the roads were to be private. But we're assuming that these are public roadways to be offered for dedication to the township, and the township presumably will accept them.
How many homes of each market type will change hands each year? So for instance, how many 4-bedroom, single-family detached side entrance homes will trade hands each year?
I refer to that as the annual housing turnover rate. It's shown on both of the spreadsheets in the lower right-hand corner, and the projection is for 5% every year for the single-family detached dwellings of both types, and 10% for the carriage homes.
Okay, so 13 and a half or 14 carriage homes will trade hands each year?
Approximately, yes.
And that will happen every year from year one?
Yes, on average, yes.
And upon what is that expectation based? What data are you using to make that prediction?
The housing turnover rates are standard industry knowledge, typically 5% for singles, 10% for carriage homes, or townhouses attached in general, and 15% for multifamily condos.
Okay. Have you done any independent analysis to determine whether or not those data hold true for the central Chester County market?
No.
When considering the impact on the school district, FISC, you made a distinction between the number of school-aged children who will reside at the development and the number of those children who will attend the Westchester Area School District, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. What, if any, consideration did you make with regard to the fact that the school district remains responsible for transportation costs associated with those students who will attend private schools?
That is actually baked into the analysis because it is part of the expenditures of the school district. I don't dissociate transportation costs or any other costs for that matter associated with children who are in not private schools or charter schools or what have you. If it's part of that, whatever the number was for the school, 231 million or so, then it's assumed to be part of the expenditures for the proposed development as well.
So just to make sure I understand that answer, your number, for instance, of $492,294 for the carriage homes is a per pupil expenditure of $20,135 times 28 students or times 24 students?
Times 24. And it's not exactly 24, it could be, it's a fraction one way or the other. You understand how spreadsheets work.
I do. I hope. Maybe they don't.
My point is that if you were to multiply 24 times 20,135, you might not get 492,294 exactly, because that 24 public school students may be 23.7 and maybe 24.2. I could tell you if you want, I can fire up the computer and give you the fraction of a student if you care that much.
That's okay. But it is your testimony that the school district expenditures are calculated inclusive of the transportation costs associated with school-age children at the development, regardless of whether or not those students will attend the school district itself. Is that correct?
The expenditures for transportation for students who do not attend the public schools is part of the calculation for the expenditures for the proposed development, but only for the public school students therein. So it is baked into the numbers to the greatest degree that I believe possible.
Those are all the questions I have on cross. Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Ms. Labor, do you have any questions for Ms. Witness? Okay. I'll note that Mr. Crawford for Birmingham Township was here but has left. I don't know if there's anyone here for Birmingham other than Mr. Crawford. I don't believe Mr. Thompson is here for Neighbors for Crebilly. Is there anyone here that has any questions on behalf of Neighbors for Crebilly? Okay, we'll just continue down our list. Dr. Scanlon, I believe you're here. Do you have any questions on behalf of the school district?
Good evening. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Hello, Dr. Scanlon. Good to see you again.
We meet again. Nice job on the numbers, by the way.
Thank you.
I do understand that you calculated the per pupil student expenses at $20,000, looking at just the total expenses. And to clarify one of the questions, does that include all of the non-public school kids in there? That would. There are some other things that we would back out of that number, but I do understand that. Just a couple clarification points, if I could.